You're watching the Segpay News Network. Today we're talking with CEO Cathy Beardsley from Segpay. Hello again, everybody. It's Mark Pettit in the Segpay News studio here in the United States, and we have a very special guest with us today. She is the founder and CEO of Segpay, Cathy Beardsley. Cathy, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
Hi, Mark.
It's a very big year for Segpay. This is the 20th anniversary of the company. So first of all, congratulations on that, Cathy. That's a huge accomplishment, and you should be very proud. So Cathy, how has the year been, first of all, for merchants, especially high-risk merchants around the world?
So it's been a good year. Overall, our portfolio has grown about 12% year over year. There's been growth in Europe and the UK that outpaced that 12%. And then the US has been a little bit of a different story where our actual volume is down about 4%. And it's not due to client losses, it's due to our good friend age verification.
Wow. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. That's a big deal. So Cathy, what type merchants are doing well? What would you say, what's doing well in the marketplace right now?
So definitely the fan sites, they continue to grow. We tend to see new ones every week. AI has been a big hit, and we're seeing existing merchants add AI components into their site, in particular subscription sites.
So let's dive in now to those big initials, AI. It seems like everybody's trying to figure it out, how to incorporate it into their businesses. I'm sure you're seeing that because it seems high risk is always on the cutting edge of about everything, right?
So AI has definitely been the number one talked about, number one request of our merchants. And we have existing merchants adding AI into their site. As I mentioned before, the subscription sites are adding it in there so they can create a level of engagement for the consumer. For instance, one merchant is kind of cloning their models, and you could be on their Mark and saying, I like a certain type of scene, and that model will say, well, come look at this video, Mark. The fan sites are adding AI in so that the content creators can continue to monetize while they're sleeping. They're not always having to produce content. They're doing that through AI. And then we're seeing just a straight up AI site. So that's where the consumer is allowed to go in, generate content, and do what they want with that content. But there's been challenges with AI. I don't know if you want to get into that yet or.
Yeah, I definitely do. Cathy, let me ask you about AI as far as content creators. Is this good for them or bad for them?
So it's good for them, right? So, as a content creator, you have to constantly be shooting content, right? Which I think could be very tiring in a 24/7 job, where now they have AI to help augment that content that they were shooting, right? So they can clone themselves, and that clone can then be creating content, talking to the consumer. So I think it's helping them further monetize their brands.
So they just have to be smart about how they use AI, right? Now let's get into the challenges, because I'm sure the banks have freaked out and the credit card schemes as well, right? Over all this.
Right. So the banks, that's been our number one challenge, right? We have a never-ending supply of merchants that want to add AI into their site. In the US, I only have one acquirer that's open to AI, and it's got to be thoroughly vetted. And in Europe, UK, I have two. The banks and even our internal compliance team is nervous about it, right? Because how are you controlling what's being generated? Is that content compliant? Are they, even in their words and what they're talking about, is that compliant? And so our teams spend hours upon hours trying to break these sites. And unfortunately, they eventually break it. So it goes back to the merchant to try and clean it up and make it compliant. And then from there, it has to go through the whole banks process. So we got a long way before the banks are taking AI or they're very comfortable with it. So it's a challenge.
So Cathy, did I understand that correctly, that Segpay's team is trying to break the sites to find problems before they become issues?
Yep, 100%. Meaning I want to make sure if I have my business model allows the consumer to create some type of image, is that image compliant with card brand rules? And the card brand rules, their stance on AI is it's got to follow all of their existing rules, right? It can't violate any of their content standards. You still have to have the complaint process. So everything that we do for traditional content has to be done for AI content.
And I'm sure as hard or scary as that seems for merchants, the better we are on the front end, the better on the back end, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, we want to make sure the front end, we want to make sure it's perfect, right? And I'll be honest with you, we took on an AI site early in the year. And it was one where someone uploaded some content, created something that was non-compliant, and we got tagged by Visa. So we've been a little skittish about AI, and we want to make sure it's perfect and we don't have problems.
And have you had to pour resources into this, Cathy, both personnel and financial technology?
So it's definitely been people at the moment, to the point that we kind of park some of them because we can't spend all of our resources trying to break these AI sites. But I have been working with another company, Aetherlab, that's actually built out a tool that will do this process in an automated way. And nothing's been finalized there, but I've definitely seen their tool. And I think it's something that could be very interesting to help us move AI sites forward.
So, Cathy, is your advice to embrace AI if you're a merchant and figure out how to use it to drive your business, and same for content creators?
So what I would do is make sure you can get it processing for it before you dig too deep, because you don't want to invest and spend all this money and create this program and then there's no way for you to monetize it, right? Because we've had some merchants add it in to their site. The bank came across it and said, get rid of it. We're not processing for any type of AI. So as I said, there's only a few select banks that are willing to dabble in AI.
So it's get your idea approved before you get too far
Your
down the
idea
pipe, right?
approved, get your policies written out, how you make sure that it's 100% compliant, what's your moderation policy, what are your guardrails, how do we know for sure that the content is compliant?
Lots to think about, right? So, Cathy, AI has been a huge issue, and now AV has also been another big issue for the year, right? Can you tell us what this has been like this year?
So age verification has been a challenge. Earlier in the year, Visa updated all of their rules and said, hey, payment processors and acquirers, you have to make sure your merchants are compliant with age verification legislation. So we began that process when the Visa rules changed to make sure merchants were compliant. Any new merchant that came through at that point in time had to have AV in place. And same, the banks also required it. Where things really changed was at the end of June, when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the state of Texas. There was a big lawsuit. The FSC was challenging the law in Texas about age verification. And the Supreme Court said, hey, nope, we believe that adult content sites should have age verification in place. And to be honest, fighting age verification and adult content is a tough one, right? No one really wants children to have access to adult content. So it's a tough argument to win. And sure enough, we didn't win it. So at the end of June, I feel like a line was drawn in the sand. All the states that had kind of put their legislation on hold, waiting for this ruling, all fired up and got active with age verification. Over half of the US states now have some type of age verification law in place, and each one of them all have unique nuances that we all have to comply to. And it's not only the US, Ofcom at the same time, Ofcom is a regulator in the UK. They put out their age verification rules late last year into this year, and that they went into full enforcement in July. So now age verification is just part of the norm. And we've seen an impact on our merchant base, in particular in the US, in which our overall volume has dropped 4% this last year. And it's not because we lost a merchant, and it's not that we haven't added a merchant. It's really been consumers shying away from signing up because they have to go through an age verification process.
And some merchants, I think, have put their heads in the sand a little bit, or just said, we'll shut down this state or that country. But eventually it's going to be everywhere. So you got to figure out how to operate, right?
Right. I think in the US, initially people were just blocking states. But now, because it's over half the states, you can't block half of the United States, right? So they're moving forward with it. And consumers are getting used to it. The merchants are getting used to it. So I feel like when we talk this time next year, Mark, I'm going to be like, yep, it's just the normal flow. People have age verification in place, and we're all getting used to it.
It's sort of like two-step authentication, right, Cathy? That we all hated that initially.
Right.
And now it's just, that's the norm on almost every, especially a financial site, right?
Yep. But yeah, I remember, that was like 7 years ago, where we had to put it, in particular in Europe, the UK, where it became a rule where every single transaction new sign-up had to be double authenticated, and that was going to be the end of the world. Now
Yep.
it's just, this is the norm.
You just have to adapt in this world, it seems like, right? And it's the most heavily regulated industry that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But Cathy, it's getting serious. Like Ofcom, who we have talked to earlier this year, they've put some pretty stiff fines out, right?
Yeah, 100%. They're going after merchants that aren't compliant. They've got, I think I've seen a couple of fines up to like £1 million, which is significant, right? No, I mean, you could go out of business because of that. So they mean business. Italy, just about a month ago, put out a list of merchants. They've identified 20, 30 merchants that they're going to go after. Make sure you have AV in place.
It's not going away. So figure it out, right? There are tools out there. We've talked about a number of them this year. And if you have questions, reach out to Segpay, right? You can help. All right. So Cathy, switching gears now from AV to another acronym, VAMP, right?
VAMP, yes.
Another big issue this year.
Yes. So VAMP, that was the new visa rule this year. There's always a new visa rule, right? So VAMP stands for Visa Acquirer Monitoring Program. And that it was rolled out in April and went into enforcement. That's when they start fining you if you're not compliant in October. And really, though, what it does, like we were all used to managing chargeback ratios, right? Everyone knew for Visa, I got to be below 0.9. For MasterCard, is below 1.5. So VAMP is really focused on acquirers, the bank, and that the bank has to maintain a 50 basis point fraud level. That was also a new metric that we didn't really track that well because we focused on chargeback. There's more fraud disputes in the system than there are actually chargebacks. So that 50 basis point requirement for the acquirer is really tough to manage. And in particular, banks are clustered doing adult, right? So in particular, like in the US, there's a handful of banks, all the merchants go there, and they don't have a mainstream portfolio to offset those ratios. So those banks are under a lot of pressure to make sure they maintain that 50 basis points, which means that Segpay as a payment processor or payment facilitator has to be there, and then we're making our merchants be there. So what came with VAMP, so now we're managing the fraud ratios, but you get an offset if you're using their tools, Visa tools. So there's something called RDR, Rapid Dispute Resolution, which at the network level, if there's a fraud claim, it'll automatically reverse that transaction and give a refund back to the consumer. It'll also prevent chargebacks from coming in. So if you're using their tools, which they charge for, RDR, there's also Verify and Ethica tools, which instead of it happening at the network level, the merchant manages those. So if you use those tools, it helps you get to that 50 basis points.
It's a lot to comprehend, right? And it's almost like Segpay has to help be the police in some cases, right? Keep our merchants compliant.
Yes. I will often describe ourselves as the police because we're the ones enforcing the regulations, the rules, whether they're card brand rules or regulatory rules. We're the ones making sure those merchants are in compliance, that their businesses are protected, that they themselves aren't going to get in trouble. And of course, we don't want to get in trouble, right?
Exactly. So Cathy, what other trends have you seen this year and what can we look forward to in 2026?
I don't know if it's really a trend, but I would say US acquiring has been quite difficult. There's only a handful of banks. One of the big banks that supported the adult market was Humboldt Bank, Humboldt Merchant Services, which used BMO as their sponsoring bank. BMO decided to get out of the space this year. So that's one less bank that we have to support the industry. And then the banks are getting a little more nervous, right? Age verification makes them nervous. They also aren't, in the US in particular, fan sites, the user-generated content. Some of them have said, hey, enough is enough. We don't want any more. We're seeing a lot of tightening in the US market, which is also leading merchants. I've had several merchants pick up home and move over to Europe, literally move over to Europe and set up shop and start working in what they feel is a more conducive environment.
I think you wrote about that in XBiz, the great digital
right.
Exit. So Cathy, why are we so conservative here in the United States versus other parts of the world when it comes to these banking options?
Mark, I wish I had an answer for you.
Okay, so that's fair.
I don't know why they are. It's very frustrating. There are, interesting enough, I sit on the board of the FSC, Free Speech Coalition, and they've been really focused on the last couple of years on banking discrimination. And the Trump administration, maybe a few months ago, put out a notice and specifically called out banking discrimination actually a recent one came out where it actually identified the adult market. So maybe there's something we can lean on right now to go back to these banks and say, you can't shut the adult market out. It's discriminatory. So we have kind of the administration supporting us.
Because I think President Trump has claimed that he was the victim of banking discrimination himself.
He got closed out by all of his banks. That also pushed him into crypto, right?
And Cathy, when you've been to Capitol Hill, you've been to Capitol Hill to try to educate lawmakers.
Right.
It seems like they'll listen, at least on the staff level.
Yes, they do listen. And no matter what type of congressional or Senate office we went to, whether it was Democrat or Republican, the Democrats focus on people that are marginalized, right? The Republicans are like, if it's a legal business, you should have banking. So they're able to agree that this is an important topic. And obviously, we've seen now some of these executive orders coming from the Trump administration focusing on it.
It's almost like they have to experience it before they understand it and do something about it. But it's better than no action at all. So, Cathy, 20 years in business, how has Segpay made it and been so successful with all these challenging elements that you deal with?
A lot of hard work. No, it's actually having a good team. And through those 20 years, right, there's always challenges. You and I have worked together for most of those 20 years, right? And how many times have I told you about a challenge? We have to get through it. And after you get through a handful of those challenges, you're like, okay, what's the next challenge? How do we solve it? Like, you can weather the storm. It's like age verification. We know we can weather the storm. So we've been through it before.
And we've sort of joked about this, that you were the CEO and now you're the group CEO, that there are other senior leaders that have come onto the team, especially in the last few years.
Yep. By regulations, there needs to be a CEO in Ireland. There needs to be a CEO in the UK. I'm very fortunate. I have Mike Shea in Ireland and Stanley Scoglin in the UK, who are really smart, brilliant people that I get to work with every day.
And I think you were really smart, Cathy, to start in Europe. That's how you started Segpay, working with merchants in the EU, right?
Yep. So when we first started, our first banking relationship before high risk was in Europe. And it was at a time when there was only one other player really in the space in Europe. So today, 60% of our volume is really driven by the Europe and the UK merchants. It took us about a year to get a US relationship. And Visa introduced us to our first US bank, which is great.
And PayPal has been a huge partner in helping us in the EU, right?
Yep. So PayPal, we formed a strategic partnership with them back in 2020. And it's been life-changing. They've been great partners. Merchants like PayPal, consumers like PayPal, and it's driven a lot of volume to Segpay and for our merchants.
Do you think the multiple payment options that you see in Europe drive a lot of the innovation in business, Cathy?
Yeah, I think it helps. Or multiple payment options, right? Meet the consumer with their need, right? I carry X in my wallet, or I want to pay from my bank, or I want to use PayPal. So I think it helps drive, I don't know necessarily innovation, but it drives their volume.
Do you think we'll see more of that going forward, that paying the way they want to pay?
Yeah, so I think the biggest shift we're going to start seeing, and we're kind of lagging in the US, is really the bank-to-bank payments. We see it in the US like through Venmo or Zelle, but we can't really use that in an e-commerce transaction. But in Europe, the UK, Brazil, everywhere, they're moving to these bank-to-bank solutions for the consumer. And we like those because they're lower cost. Once I push that payment, there's no refunding it, charging it back. So it's a great option to move to.
And do you see any trends in monetization and payments that we should be watching in 2026?
So I think the pay by bank is the option, right? We'll see that. I think in 2020, we implemented crypto. And at first I'm like, oh, why do we spend all this time doing this? Like, no one's using it. And over this last year, I've seen a much bigger increase in our crypto transactions. You also see the focus there from the Trump administration, right? They've put a lot of focus. They have the Genius Act. So they're putting effort into crypto, and I believe crypto will become more mainstream. But again, that moves money quicker, it's cheaper, and it's similar to pay by bank, right? It's a one and done. There's no going back.
And I know you're looking to other regions of the world, so hopefully we'll have some more expansion to talk about in 2026.
Yes, we're going down under.
Oh, and Cathy, you're continuing to form partnerships with other companies, technology partners, etc. It's a group effort.
Correct. So the other big area of focus for me this coming year is our gateway. So traditionally, we've been a payment facilitator. We've leveraged the gateway, but now we're really kind of pulling that gateway out. We're adding a new admin to it. We've been approved to integrate with Shopify. They hadn't added any new payment providers in a good 5-6 years. And so we've got that set up, and we hope to have that live by May this year, which I think will also help us open up to some new verticals.
Okay, that's two breaking news events right there. Down Under expansion and a Shopify partnership that we can talk about in the new year. So Cathy, anything else you want to talk about? Are you excited about 2026? Do you think it's going to be a decent year?
I am. Really, right now we're end of year. So we're starting to talk about our goals for next year. I just sat in a sales meeting as they were talking about their goals. They got a good plan in place. We're outlining what are the new features, what are we going to focus on for our merchants? And then there's a whole bunch of efficiency projects we have in place. So I'm very excited about 2026. 2025 was great, but I'm ready to enjoy my holidays and then
you have earned it, Cathy. You've earned it. So thank you so much for taking time. Cathy Beardsley, CEO of Segpay, will be back for another full year in 2026.
Thanks, Mark.